A 17-year-old girl and her friend went to travel around Australia, and at one point disappeared without a trace. Despite a large-scale search and many witnesses, her fate remained unknown for 18 years. When this terrible mystery was finally solved, one outrageous fact became clear. The police had everything to close this case in a matter of days, but negligence and lack of professionalism stretched it out for almost 2 decades. In this video, we will tell you what happened to Hayley Dodd. Hayley Dodd was born on November 30, 1981 in England. When the girl was little, her parents moved to Australia with other children, settling in the small town of Mongera. The girl was an excellent student, played sports, and planned to study to become a veterinarian or a school teacher. But before she finally decided on her future profession, she wanted to travel around Australia. After leaving school in 1999 at the age of 17, she went on a trip to Western Australia with her best friend Lisa. They planned not just to travel around local cities and attractions, but to spend several months away from home. The girls were going to look for temporary part-time jobs along the way to cover living expenses, food, and travel. They planned to hitchhike between cities, which in the 90s in Australia did not seem such a dangerous idea. At that time, there were several cases of murders of girls who were hitchhiking in the country. But against a backdrop of the total number of people hitchhiking safely, these crimes did not cause any mass fear. However, Hayley was afraid that her parents would not allow her to travel this way, even in the company of a friend. For this reason, she assured them that she planned to travel by buses. At the end of July, he and Lisa went to a city called Dongara. There, they were going to work part-time on a local farm. The girls stopped at a special campsite, where for a small fee they could get her place to stay for the night. Such places in Australia are in great demand mainly due to their cheapness. A few days before going to work, Hayley decided to take advantage of the remaining free time and go to a family friend's farm, which was 200 kilometers away. She decided to hitchhike to get there. Lisa didn't want to let her go alone, but Hayley insisted that she had nothing to worry about and would be back in a few days. As a parting gift, Lisa gave her her folding leg for self-defense and some change so that Hayley could call her from a phone booth. After saying goodbye, she hit the road at about 8 a.m. Family friends at the farm were waiting for her arrival, but Hayley never showed up. Concerned, they called her mother and reported it. The woman feared that something might have happened to her daughter, so she immediately contacted the police. The first thing she did was dial the emergency number and describe the situation. After listening to her story, the operator believed that nothing urgent had happened. Therefore, he advised her to go to the local police department and file a missing person report. So she did. Detectives began searching for Hayley, beginning to reconstruct the chronology of events. First of all, they arrived at the campsite where Lisa was. She was devastated by the news that her friend never made it to the farm. However, the girl was able to give the police comprehensive water data. She accurately described all the clothes Hayley was wearing that day, and even drew a sketch of the earrings she was wearing for the police. Hayley bought these earrings a few days before the incident. She and Lisa went to the store to treat themselves to some inexpensive things, and the girl liked this decoration. At that moment, she could not even think that these earrings would become the key to solving this terrible mystery of her disappearance. Detectives disseminated information about the girl's disappearance along with her signs. And despite the fact that she was almost 18 years old, Hayley looked much younger. Her height was 152 centimeters, and she weighed just over 40 kilograms. The police were quickly able to find a first witness. He turned out to be the driver of the truck who gave her a lift that day. According to the man's story, she knocked on the window of his cab at a gas station and asked for a ride to the town of Mora, near which the farm was located. The truck driver was heading to another city, but he agreed to drive her most of the way. A man dropped her off at a turnoff 50 kilometers from Mora, near the town of Banjingara, where she had to turn off the main road onto a country road. According to the trucker, Haley was in a great mood. I talked to him all the way and talked about my journey. After she said she had virtually no money, he gave her $15 so she could buy something to eat. The men also left her his number in case she hitchhiked back. He traveled along this road almost every day and could fail her again. Detectives later received several more calls from people who saw Haley in the area. Based on their statements, police concluded that the girl was on foot along the northwest road towards Moore. Apparently, at the gas station, she was unable to find a single driver who could let her down. For this reason, she decided to walk along the road and try to catch a ride. Based on the testimony of the next witness, he gave Haley a ride to the Windy-Ardee Road turnoff, after which she continued on foot in her direction. The next witness was a woman driving along this road. She noticed Haley just as the girl was getting out of the car and walking towards Moore. In total, more than 10 witnesses contacted the police. Putting their statements together, detectives came to the conclusion that the girl was last seen at approximately 12 noon on the northwest road, about 50 kilometers from Moore. However, there was one more witness. He didn't see Haley, but he still shared the disturbing observation with police. The man stopped on the side of the northwest road due to the engine overheating. At some point, he heard a dog barking, followed by a woman's shrill scream. He was unable to discern the source of the sound, since it could have been quite far away. The road passed through an empty, flat area, where there was practically no extraneous noise. With all this information in hand, the police's forecasts were disappointing from the very beginning. Lead Detective Eddie Rowe decided that they should look for the body and not consider the possibility that Haley might be alive. But management forbade him to conduct an investigation in a similar vein, leaving this case in the status of a search for a missing person. It is worth clarifying here that when investigating a murder, the police would have more options, as opposed to investigating a missing person. But the police did not have a single clue that could help them track down the girl, so they quickly began searching for potential kidnappers. In a short time, they were able to identify several dozen suspects living in the area. But ultimately, the police focused on 3 men. One worked as a teacher at a local school. The second one was a part-time gardener there. The third lived near the place where Haley disappeared. During interrogation, each of them declared their innocence and provided an alibi. The police could not confidently conclude that they were innocent, but they could not find any evidence to the contrary. However, the situation soon changed dramatically. Investigators were contacted by a neighbor of one of the suspects, a 43-year-old school gardener named Francis Walk. He told them that on the day of Haley's disappearance, Francis had borrowed his car to go shopping and more. When the men returned home around 1 p.m., a neighbor noticed damage inside the car. The turn signal handle was broken. Impact marks were also visible on the dashboard. The neighbor wouldn't even have time to wonder what happened to the car. Francis came home, threw the shopping bags in the kitchen, got on his motorcycle, and drove off. This story seemed strange to the police, and they decided to re-interrogate Francis. The man assured that at the time of Haley's disappearance, he was many kilometers from the alleged place of her abduction. According to his story, after returning home, he immediately went to a party in Perth on his motorcycle. But that day he was not destined to get to this place. On the way, he exceeded the speed limit and got into a serious accident, as a result of which he was admitted to the hospital. The available information was enough for the detectives to ask the completely logical question of where he was going. His own testimony seemed very strange, and investigators decided to apply for a warrant to search his home. Police searched his home, but were unable to find any potential evidence. They also searched the car and removed seat covers for experts to examine in a laboratory. Unfortunately, all this did not bring any results, and Francis was left alone. Almost immediately after this, he moved to the other side of the country to Queensland. The detectives were left empty-handed, and the case went into overdrive. They tried to find new witnesses and evidence that would allow the investigation to move forward, but without success. This went on for 8 years. until in 2007 Francis again appeared on the police radar. At that time, he lived in a remote area in a small settlement. One morning, an elderly couple who lived next door to him were sitting on the veranda of their house. At some point, they noticed with horror that a girl was running towards them, completely without clothes, and her head was covered in blood. She asked for help, and the residents of the house called the police. The victim said she tried to hitch a ride last night. A man stopped in front of her and offered to give her a ride. At some point, he told her that he needed to stop at a certain place for gasoline and fill up the car. They drove up to a house in the middle of nowhere, and he called the woman inside, inviting her to drink tea. Unfortunately for her, she agreed. Almost immediately after this, he attacked her and, after a short struggle, tied her up. Over the next few hours, the victim was subjected to indescribable torture and violence. The attacker also tore off one of her earrings and took it for himself. As you may have guessed, this man was Francis. By morning, the woman realized that she might be able to remove the rope from her hands and then free her legs and run. She loosened the rope, waited for the right moment when Francis was as far away as possible, and rushed to the back door of the house. Before leaving, she took off her pendant and threw it under the bed. The woman feared that the police might not find any confirmation of her story, so she decided to leave some personal item in his house. And it really worked. The police searched Francis's house, found the same pendant, and arrested the man. At the trial, he quickly realized that he would not be able to escape punishment, and decided to confess to what he had done. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Western Australia police who were involved in the Haley Dodd case were notified of Francis' arrest, but they were apparently not at all interested. Detectives took no action to revive the 8-year-old case that was so similar to Francis's crime. It was only thanks to the persistence of Haley's mother that the detectives agreed to look at the case again, but very quickly came to the conclusion that there was still no evidence against Francis, which means they can't do anything. All these years, Haley's family tried to get the police to conduct a thorough investigation, but they insisted that they did everything in their power. Desperate to wait for help from law enforcement agencies, the relatives spent tens of thousands of dollars on private investigators. But all this was to no avail. A new turn in this matter occurred only after 6 long years in 2013, and here one extremely outrageous fact became clear. It turned out that the police simply forgot about the evidence that ultimately turned out to be key in this case. Forensic pathologist Tracy Horn has requested that the investigation be reopened. The reason for this was that the same car seat covers seized from Francis's neighbor's car in 1999 were found in the evidence warehouse. Suddenly it became clear to everyone that in all 14 years, they had never bothered to check them for blood, DNA samples, and other evidence. When the experts finally got them out, they immediately managed to find a woman's earring, which had become caught in the fabric of the covers. Taking the drawing of Lisa, which she made for the police immediately after her friend's disappearance, the detectives realized with horror that this was the same earring that Haley was wearing on the day of her disappearance. But that's not all. A human hair was found on one of the car mats, which were also taken from the car. Experts extracted a DNA sample from him, which showed a match with the DNA of Haley Dodd's mother. This meant that the hair most likely belonged to Haley herself. However, this probability was not 100%, which greatly complicated the task and did not allow Francis to be brought to justice as soon as possible. As soon as this news leaked to the media, a wave of criticism rained down on the police. For 14 years, this evidence lay literally under the noses of the investigators, but during all this time they never remembered about it. Of course, such a discovery instantly changed the case, and the detectives headed to the other end of the country to interrogate Francis again. At that time, he was still in prison for assaulting a woman in 2007. The man told them the same story as 14 years ago. He denied any involvement and insisted that at the time of Haley's abduction he had gone shopping in Mora. The interrogation, which lasted almost 4 hours, did not bring any results, so the police had to prepare this case for transfer to court. This only happened in 2015, when he was officially charged with Haley's murder and deported to Western Australia. 2 years later, at the end of 2017, the trial began. Francis' defense insisted that all the evidence presented was circumstantial. The earring that Haley bought at a local store was very cheap and popular, so another woman might have left it in the car. A hair found in the car showed an almost 100% match with Haley's DNA, but not absolutely. Even though a mistake was highly unlikely, it was enough for the lawyers. But all these arguments seemed unconvincing to the judge. Perhaps Francis would have still had a chance to escape punishment if not for his crimes in 2007. However, then he not only kidnapped a woman who was hitching a ride, but also took her earring. The prosecution believed that the man collected the victim's earrings as trophies, which ultimately only increased suspicion against him. As a result, the judge found him guilty of kidnapping and murder of Haley Dodd, sentencing him to 21 years in prison. All this happened while his previous term had not yet ended. Francis was 62 years old at the time of his sentencing. But the story did not end there. The court found that Francis kidnapped and killed Haley, and then hid her body. But he was never found, and the man himself refused to admit his guilt. Haley's mother repeatedly appealed to the killer to tell him where he hid the body, but to no avail. And in 2018, she helped pass a new law that would make killers ineligible for early release if they refused to reveal the location of their victims' bodies. Another high-profile event occurred in 2020. The court granted Francis' appeal to overturn the sentence and ordered a new hearing. His lawyers again tried to insist that the man would not have had time to kidnap Haley between the trip to Moore and his return home. However, the court considered that the time frame allowed him to do this, especially given the rush with which he arrived home and immediately went to Perth on a motorcycle. Moreover, the earring along with the hair were still on the list of key evidence against him. But Francis still managed to get his sentence changed. The court found him guilty of unintentional murder, reducing the term from 21 years to 18 years. However, thanks to a law adopted in 2018, he will not be able to be released even after this period if he refuses to indicate the location of the body. There is one more point in this whole story that haunts detectives to this day. They are sure that many more women became victims of Francis, and none of them managed to escape. This maniac could have been picking up girls on the roads for decades, and only he knows what happened to them next. One of the most likely such cases is the disappearance of a woman at the end of 2005. She hitchhiked to another city and was never seen again. The detective working the case is sure that Francis kidnapped her because he personally knew the victim, but there is no evidence at the moment. Perhaps the police will find them again in their warehouse a few years later, but this will make little difference to the criminal. If the police had examined the car more thoroughly, Francis would have been arrested back in 1999.